A lot of my teens these days in my pediatric clinic are struggling with anxiety, depression, focus, right? Just mental health stuff. So I had this young lady, she's 16 years old, came into my practice a few months ago. I've known her since she was a baby. She came from a family where they were athletes, ate healthy, wonderful family. I've known all the siblings. And normally she's a happy, just great, just, ready to take on the world.
Sure.
And she sat there like this, just depressed, could barely talk. And she'd seen a psychiatrist. She was on 2 medications. She couldn't get out of bed to go to school. She was suicidal. I mean, it was tragic.
Yeah.
Looked over her case, and I lowered one of her meds and said, well, here's some things to try, diet, exercise. But she was so far depressed and anxious and disconnected that I wasn't hopeful that was going to do much. I said, let me see you back here in a month. She comes back a month later. Hi, Dr. Paul. How you doing? She was like healed.
Wow.
I'm like going, whoa, I've never seen this with a medication change, like a minor tweak. What happened? You look like you feel great. I do feel great. I said, well, what's different? I don't know. I said, something's different. Well, you changed my medicine. No, I'm saying that wasn't it. Something else. And the mom says, remember, honey, right after you left Dr. Paul's office, you had a concussion and you were put on complete bed rest, brain rest. No screens, no TV, no school, just total brain rest. And that was just a month of that, and she was cured. So I said, well, how much time are you spending on these screens? Oh, a lot. I said, how much? Probably too much. 7 to 8 hours a day. She was on her phone. That's on school days.
Wow.
Non-school days, it was even more. When those were cut off, her brain could heal. And I think that was just like the aha. I've got a whole chapter in my book, The Addiction Spectrum, about screen addictions.
Hey friend, welcome back. It's Mike Mutzel here with HighIntensityHealth.com, and thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully I didn't make you hungry there. I just had to include some of that B-roll footage of some of my favorite restaurants and coffee shops in Portland. The links are below. It's an amazing city, one of my favorite cities. So we're talking about all things addictions today with my friend Dr. Paul Thomas. We've had a few shows with him on before. The links are below this video. And this is brought to you by PerfectKeto.com, the makers of high-quality MCT oil, exogenous ketones, and blood sugar support formulas. As you know, I love their Salted Carmel MCT oil powder and many other formulations that they offer. And they have a great promotion going on for the high-intensity health community. Just go to perfectketo.com/HIH. Again, that's perfectketo.com/HIH. You can save up to 20% off their amazing formulations. Now, I will just add this little caveat. There's not a lot of research up to now that I'm aware of when it comes to using MCT oil formulations and exogenous ketones in the context of addictions. But I will tell you my end of one personal experience. I could easily go through a bottle of red wine every single night. If it was up to me, sometimes I do that. And it's been a long time since I've done that. And I will say, since going keto, my inclination to drink alcohol has been diminished dramatically. Is it the ketones? Is it the resilience? Is it the increased parasympathetic tone and heart rate variability from being in the ketogenic state? I don't know, but I will say, when I was writing the book Belly Fat Effect back in 2011, 2012, 2013, man, I was drinking a lot more alcohol than I do now, and I attribute that largely to my increased coherence and resiliency associated with being in a ketogenic state. So just keep that in mind. I hope more research is coming. Dr. Paul and I have kind of talked about this, and I'm not the expert, he is. So let's dive back into the show and pick his brain on how to overcome addictions, whether it's porn, food, alcohol, drugs, cell phone, and everything in between. Here we go. These microphones actually change the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Make it a little harder to just converse, or it helps?
I think it helps.
Yeah.
Because it's like, at least I've seen from other interviews, because people feel like they can like hold on to something. There's like something, I don't know, like they're in control.
I might just stand up and start singing.
Start rocking out, karaoke style. So we're good. Dr. Paul, it's great to be with you again.
It is my pleasure to be with you. Thanks for coming down.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love going to Portland. I have dinner tonight with some friends, the Retzers. I have to introduce you to them if you don't know them.
Yeah.
And I was with one of, I don't know if it's breaking HIPAA, but I was with one of your patients'
Let's not
parents.
say their name.
Okay, yeah, great. They only say great things about you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, so this is our third chat. We talked a lot about vaccinations before and personalizing the vaccination protocol.
Yeah.
I have a great book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, that I'll put in the notes below.
Okay.
But you've been spending a lot of time, in your clinical practice as well, helping people overcome addictions.
Correct.
Which, gosh, there's so many different angles we can talk about. But how did you personally get so interested in addiction medicine?
All right. Get right to it.
Boom.
So I don't know, Mike, I think you know a little bit of my story, but for your listeners, I myself am an alcoholic. I'm in recovery. I have 15 years of no drinking. I didn't grow up as a kid thinking I want to be an alcoholic, right? That's not something that people tend to aspire to become. Well, I think I want to be a drug addict or an alcoholic. No, it just happens. Well, how does that happen? I had an amazing childhood. I mean, missionary kid in Africa. I mean, truly. I love everything about my childhood. I went to a boarding school in Swaziland. I was far away from home, which in retrospect, that was a stressor that I wasn't aware was a stressor, but I was, thousands of miles away from home, a couple thousand. But back then, we're talking in the 60s and 70s, we couldn't even call home in Africa. So we just wrote letters.
Where in Africa? South Africa?
So my parents were in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and I was in Swaziland, which is a little country tucked between South Africa and Mozambique.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had that stressor, although I didn't perceive it as a stressor at the time. Then I came to the United States for college, and I'm 17 years old, and my entire support system is in Africa. And I didn't even see that as a stressor, but as I think back about it, that's when I started smoking cigarettes and drinking. And, I think I was trying to find relief for the tension, the anxiety I was feeling. But I was sort of wired to be successful, so I wasn't aware that I was under stress and that I was doing some things that were maladaptive. Fast forward, medical school, residency to become a pediatrician. I was a binge drinker, I think, at that point, kind of like college, where you drink
Friday night.
Yeah, you drink too much on Friday night, and sometimes I would carry it over onto Saturday night. Fast forward couple more decades, and I was drinking every night. Right? I had to drink to sleep, and waking up hungover, and I realized this is horrible. I just didn't. If you've got listeners who have experienced addiction, you understand that towards the end of it, you just feel empty inside. You can put on a fake smile. You can, I still had my look good. I was, a doctor. I was even teaching residents and medical students there for a while. I was the director of pediatrics at a local hospital. I mean, I had the wife, the kids, the car, the job. I had my look good on. But when I smiled, I can be real honest, back then I would
fake it.
It was fake. Inside I was just, I was hurting. I was empty.
Was it guilt? Where is this hurt coming from?
Addiction it sucks the life out of you. It really does. When you're drinking as much as I was at the end and waking up just feeling like, just hungover.
Yeah.
And then it just starts to lift, but then you don't feel right, and that first drink helps you feel a little better. That's that addiction cycle. You're going through withdrawal, your initial retake of your substance of choice. In my case, it was alcohol. You just felt a little better, but you have the phenomenon I did, and once you're truly addicted, you've got the phenomenon of craving going on. So you have one drink, you've got to have more.
You can't stop.
Can't stop. My parents used to split a beer. A cheap beer at that. What is wrong with these people? Right? Bush beer. Nothing against Bush beer. Well, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, at least split a microbrew or something.
Sure.
So that is crazy. But anyway, I drank to excess. So I had that. Then I married a woman who ended up getting addicted to opiates. And around the time that I got sober, she was spiraling in her addiction. And we had 5 kids at the time, and I'm seeing my life fall apart, and I had to do something. And thankfully, second go around, it stuck.
Yeah.
Okay. And once I got sober, now I'm becoming clear-headed, and I'm realizing that there are a lot of people struggling.
Yeah.
So in my practice, I had a huge pediatric practice. I still do. And I'm seeing teenagers, a lot of them with ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and a lot of them start medicating. That's that next step for teens when you're struggling is self-medication.
Right.
And then because of all the addiction that was going on, I started an addiction clinic because I found that especially for teens and young adults, there wasn't a good place where they could go and be understood and helped. A lot of medical treatment programs are great, but they may not really understand that teens don't need to be put on long-term medication. they need to be maybe detoxed and do that slowly and carefully so that, you help them normalize.
Sure.
I mean, you and I have talked a lot in the past of other ways of being healthy, eating healthy, real food and getting your nutrients and sleep and exercise and all microbiome, all these things that are so important.
Right.
And I wanted to get that information into the hands of people who needed it.
That's amazing. Now, that's your current wife, right?
Yes.
That went through that experience. How did you help her overcome that? Like, because you had already kind of knew like the steps and everything like that. It must have been challenging. Like because sometimes in the house, people, your spouse is like, oh yeah, honey.
So those of you who are listening in, if you are in any kind of a relationship where both of you are not quite doing things the way you're supposed to, there's an unspoken pact. Or maybe it's even a spoken agreement that you don't mess with my problems, I won't mess with yours. Okay, and so this happens all the time for relationships and couples, parents with their children. The parents maybe are drinking too much and they're trying to tell their kids don't smoke pot, or it just doesn't work, right? Unless you're on the right path. So my plan was I'm going to get a year of sobriety and then I'm going to do an intervention because I was worried about my wife. Well, 2 weeks after I started getting sober, the intervention became absolutely necessary. I mean, she had spiraled to the point where I was fearful for her life.
Wow.
And we did an intervention. So here we are both in, early sobriety, managing a household with 5 kids. 6 months later, a sister of mine dies and we get 4 more kids.
Wow.
I adopted an African sister's 4 kids. They were orphaned. So we went from 5 to 9. We're in early sobriety. Yeah. It was literally nuts.
Yeah, Mike.
But
imagine.
What an amazing training ground for learning how to, do life on life's terms and be a role model for these kids and just do the best you can to put your attention off yourself and onto someone else, which in the end is a very healing thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, was 12-step program, was that part of that for you, or?
So I did go to a 12-step program, as did my wife. And the interesting thing that you should mention that is for the younger folks, a lot of them have a hard time with 12-step programs. And so that was why I wrote the book I wrote. I wanted to bring principles that not to say don't do 12-step. I recommend it for every single patient, every person who's struggling with addictions. You should look into it. It is highly effective. But there's some other things that will help you heal and give you a fullness of life and a recovery like no other that I wanted to be addressed. So that was what I tap into in the book.
Interesting. We'll dive into that. But do you think for the young kids, the teenagers, they're kind of avoidance of the 12-step program because they think I don't have a problem. I just got in trouble. Like for me, when I was 14, I got arrested for having pot at school. I was smoking every day for months. Right. Introduced to it, as I told you on the show, when I was 9 from my little stepbrother. Yeah. Went to an outpatient thing, Lakeside Milam in Seattle. And I thought, I don't have a problem. I really don't have a problem. I'm just going to go through this because my dad wants me to. Went to the Alcoholics Anonymous, did the 12-step, and the whole time I'm thinking, I don't want to be here. I don't have these problems. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm in control. Right. And then in hindsight, you realize you're really not in control. Right. But is that part of why the young people don't like that, you think?
I think so. I think that's a big part of it. Many of my children have struggled with alcohol or substances, and they don't have a problem, right? One would say, oh, it's my medicine. And another would say, well, I can stop anytime I want. I just don't want to, right? And we had all these kids in the house. At one point, we had 6 teenagers, and 4 or 5 at a time could drive. Well, we only had 1 extra car for all these kids. So the rule was you have to pee clean, random pee tests, urine drug screens. 2 of my boys said, oh, I don't want to drive. Well, they knew they couldn't pass a random pee test. Right. They wanted to smoke pot, and so they chose not to drive, but they didn't have a problem.
They're totally in control.
Knowing how badly the freedom of driving is just so amazing, it makes me wonder. Totally. Right? That the draw to be using marijuana was so strong that they were willing to give up the access to a vehicle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we can shut that door just to be, yeah. You can keep it rolling. Yeah, it's fine. As a parent, what a great tool. I mean, to do the random drug tests, to have the car, that's great. For my brothers, my dad did that too. He was really busy working, when I was younger. And then I have younger half brothers that are 7 and 9 years apart from me. And he caught on to that point that, oh yeah, in high school, this sort of stuff happened. So he
Yeah.
started doing the random drug tests for them and everything.
Yeah. I think the other problem when young people go to 12-step meetings, generally it's an older population. There are meetings with young folks, so I would encourage people to find those. But if you're in a group where everybody's on average 40 to 80 years old, and you're in your teens or 20s, it's hard to see the similarities, even though for all of us, when you go into a group setting like that, the important thing is to look for similarities, not the differences. Look for the feelings. Right? When we started, and I was telling you that feeling of emptiness, that feeling of desperation, that hopelessness, that's pretty universal once you're struggling with a substance. And the substance might be different, the situation might be different, but the feelings are the same. And then the immense joy and happiness and levity that we get once we're free of that monkey. I mean, you know, when you get addiction behind you and you're living life in recovery, we're having fun.
Yeah.
People think, oh, they're a glum lot, you know, those poor,
teetotalers,
those poor people. Oh, heck no, man. We are laughing at the silliest things, and you would think we'd been drinking too much or something.
Totally. Yeah. Some of my most memorable nights with friends, with family, are when you're sober, haven't had any wine or anything, out exploring nature, or just engaging in conversation. Because I think that shyness or uncomfortableness, anxiety is masked with substances, and then it creates like a superficial conversation, or you don't remember things as clearly.
Yeah.
So but for a lot of, I guess the downside to, or it's a plus and a downside right now, like with all the great organic wines we have and like the hop local beers, like it's part of the
I'll
food.
never get to taste those darn things.
Yeah, so just having a little bit for the addict is just going to spiral them out of control. Is that kind of why you don't have anything at all? Is that
so? My book is called The Addiction Spectrum, and my understanding of addiction is that it's not black and white, all or none. We are all vulnerable, but some of us more vulnerable than others for a number of genetic risk factor issues that we could get into, but probably not in this talk. But you can be vulnerable and be totally unaffected, totally non-addicted, because you hardly ever touch the stuff, right? Or you can be stressed out, have a bunch of vulnerability, and very quickly get into sort of a danger zone along this spectrum from no use, no drinking, to some use, some drinking. My own story, case in point, I'm on a mountain in Swaziland. There's no access. I was not drinking, period. I didn't have any money. There was nowhere to get it. I was sober.
Yeah.
But I was just this risk factor waiting to happen. Hit college, availability, I start drinking. I'm not in trouble with my drinking, but I've moved along the spectrum until at the very end where I couldn't stop if I wanted to. Now I'm severe. I'm starting to see my liver functions going up.
Wow.
It's affecting my health. Thankfully, I was able to get sober before I was dead, or have wet brain or whatever, right? But so that's why I think it's a spectrum. And if we can, help people understand that, and that you can move yourself to safety by doing certain things, that was one of the other powerful reasons I wanted to write the book.
Love that. So it's a continuum like anything else.
Yeah.
So wet brain, I hear that ethanol, alcohol, is a neurotoxin. So it does affect the brain and all that sort of stuff. But what do you see, like with people that have been using, whether it's alcohol or pot, like are there some characteristics in terms of cognitive decline and risk for like Alzheimer's and dementia that people should be aware of? So when they study brains with MRIs, actually there's a poster behind you on the wall there that shows what the brain, what these different drugs and substances do to your brain. It actually changes how your brain looks on SPECT scans. I mean, there's real damage that can take place at the cellular level. So no question about that. Each substance has its own unique sort of risks. I mean, marijuana, there's no question that some people can use it with total immunity and they're fine. And others, with either very little use or randomly at some point, they become schizophrenic. It triggers it. Some people get very paranoid or psychotic. And the only time I've ever tried it, I was extraordinarily paranoid. It was like, oh, no way. I'm never going there again. It was scary. That kind of a reaction. With alcohol,
if you do moderation, you can drink for decades.
Yeah.
If you hit it really hard and you're not ever detoxing, so the people who are drinking morning, afternoon, and night, and they don't stop, you can trash yourself and be dead in 3 to 5 years. But most people will detox and kind of,
ebb and flow, and
string it out for decades maybe. If it's, meth, you can see a person age decades in just years.
Wow.
With use of meth. At risk for strokes, for example, with meth or cocaine. So different things have different risks of what they're going to do to your body and your brain. I kind of prefer what I would say, what you and I experience. I know how you live. I've been visited you at your home, and you've got chickens running around and organic food everywhere. And it's like, you have a different sense of health. It's just vibrant, right? And I mean, there are people who can drink a little bit safely, just like I'm sure there's people who can smoke marijuana a little bit safely. But a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
And the problem is, by the time you realize you're in trouble, for many people, it's too hard to stop.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then it's a major issue and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a similar reaction to pot like you, but my brothers, they all love it. And they've been smoking for a very long time and seemingly unaffected by it. But I know it does. They don't work out like I do and stuff like that. Not that you have to work out, right? But yeah, just there is a little bit of a difference there. Yeah, so the lifestyle really makes a big impact. Now, one thing that we haven't really talked about, but a lot of kids now are on Ritalin and Adderall, things like that. And I used that a little bit in college before tests and studying, and it really helped me. But I realized, like, wow, this stuff is like really. I noticed behavior changes, so I got off it quick. But a lot of my friends in college didn't, and they still kind of use that. And it seems like, just like opiates, oh, my back hurts, and doctors would write you a script. The same kind of thing if you go to a doctor and say, or the right doctor, hey, I think I have ADD, and then they just write prescriptions. Do you see that, just like with pain meds translating into an opiate addiction, do we see the Ritalin Adderall usage translate into meth use and things like that? Because it's similar.
A little bit, but it's interesting. So I have a huge pediatric practice, and I've looked at my numbers. I think it's about 500-600 kids out of 13,000 who are on stimulants, or at least have the diagnosis of ADD, ADHD. My goal for those kids is, if we can manage them naturally and have them be successful, excellent. But there's a fairly high percentage, actually, who do so much better when they're taking their Adderall or their methylphenidate Ritalin. If it's night and day, I mean, you've got a kid who's failing in school, their self-esteem's in the toilet, and they're about to go out and self-medicate with what else? Alcohol, marijuana, you name it, right?
Sure.
And you get them to get their brain to where it's working better. There's a value in using stimulants if it'll give them that kind of success, so that they don't go out and self-medicate. So in my addiction practice, most of my meth and even heroin addicts, actually it's not most, it's about a third to a half, because I've looked at the data, are former ADD, ADHD kids. And many of them were never treated. Their parents were against medication. So they go self-medicate. And indeed, some of the studies show that treated kids are much less likely to self-medicate than those who are left just floundering. So the data's mixed, but there can be value in a use of a pharmaceutical, but I think you ought to go into it open-minded, where you're optimizing nutrition, nutrients, and you're minimizing stress. Stress is huge, right? So there's all these factors we can do, lifestyle changes, that will help you heal. I got to tell you one story, though.
Yeah, no, let's do it.
So a lot of my teens these days in my pediatric clinic are struggling with anxiety, depression, focus, right? Just mental health stuff. So I had this young lady, she's 16 years old, came into my practice a few months ago. I've known her since she was a baby. She came from a family where they were athletes, ate healthy, wonderful family. I've known all the siblings. And normally she's a happy, just great, just, ready to take on the world.
Sure.
And she sat there like this, just depressed, could barely talk. And she'd seen a psychiatrist. She was on 2 medications. She couldn't get out of bed to go to school. She was suicidal. I mean, it was tragic.
Yeah.
Looked over her case, and I lowered one of her meds and said, well, here's some things to try, diet, exercise. but she was so far depressed and anxious and disconnected that I wasn't hopeful that that was going to do much. I said, let me see you back here in a month.
Mm-hmm.
She comes back a month later. Hi, Dr. Paul. How you doing? She was like healed.
Wow.
I'm like going, whoa, I've never seen this with a medication change, like a minor tweak. What happened? You look like you feel great. I do feel great. I said, well, what's different? I don't know. I said, something's different. Well, you changed my medicine. No, I'm saying that wasn't it. Something else. And the mom says, remember, honey, right after you left Dr. Paul's office, you had a concussion and you were put on complete bed rest, brain rest. No screens, no TV, no school, just total brain rest. And that was just a month of that, and she was cured. So I said, well, how much time were you spending on these screens? Oh, a lot. I said, how much? Probably too much. 7 to 8 hours a day. She was on her phone. That's on school days.
Wow.
Non-school days, it was even more. When those were cut off, her brain could heal. And I think that was just like the aha. I've got a whole chapter in my book, The Addiction Spectrum, about screen addictions.
Nice.
But that story isn't in the book because the book had already been submitted when that one came. But I'm getting these stories all the time. People don't realize we are animal kingdom creatures wired to scan for danger, right? If we walk around the corner and there's a bear, that experience is going to teach us when you go around corners, watch out for bears, right? But there's no bears in the corners in this office. We know that. But if that's your experience, you're going to still be stressed out, right?
Sure.
And so we have these, you're scanning your phone for instant this or whatever, right? You're on video games, and it's constant little bleeps of fight or flight, stress, and it's frying the brains.
And
really.
that you propose is a huge reason why, kids of that age range and so forth, age group, have anxiety and depression.
I think it's
maybe not just the substances.
Yeah, I think it's a huge piece of it. It starts off with poor diet.
Yeah.
And so we're stressing our system with sugar and flour, processed foods, and artificial dyes and colors and pesticides and herbicides that are in our food. It's just, there's a whole lot of stress there. But then I think this whole unbeknowing to ourselves, we're triggering little releases of fight or flight. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, just constant little boost. And I don't think those receptors are set up to handle it at that level.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's a great book out, Adam Alter, Irresistible.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, he talks all about, and I love that book. Anyone should read that, addiction or not. So now, like up to now, we've been talking about these chemical addictions, right? And how those have been kind of, if you have if you're a former alcoholic, maybe there's like a stigma associated with that. But yet so many people are addicted to their phones.
Right.
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, gaming, online gambling.
Yep.
And that's considered normal. Oh, he's just a gamer.
Right.
Oh, she loves Instagram.
Right.
But, he talks about in that book that those, and you just talked about that story with that young gal, these are as or more addictive than these substances. And it's creating this whole milieu. So I'm really glad you addressed that, because that little dopamine hit, you talked about the fear, but also on the upside.
Yep. Yeah, it's a huge thing. And the beauty of understanding it, which is, I'm grateful that we're having this talk because we're going to get some information out to people, is when you understand that that's what you're doing, you can actually knowingly make a choice to change. Right. So again, it comes to lifestyle, right? And change isn't easy. When you tell a teenager to park their phone,
right? It's tough.
That's tough.
Yeah.
But when you become aware that that's what you're doing, if you think about the fact that most of, or at least a lot of the Silicon Valley experts who are making these apps and these games, they don't let their kids even have a smartphone.
Right.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They are programming specifically to get you hooked. Right? I mean, that's how they make money. A lot of these things are attached to, options to buy things.
Yeah. Advertising, everything else.
Yeah.
Isn't that scary?
It's very scary. It's horrifying. I mean, if you're listening and you just have a window you can look out and look into the distance, and maybe you see trees or a forest, or if you're in town, whatever, you're going to see a scape, right? Think about what that does to your brain versus you're on a screen. This is way more intense when you're looking at a screen. It's a different experience, and it's really hard on your brain.
Totally.
On your neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a little girl. She's 6, and sometimes when we're driving, we'll give her the phone. She's a different kid afterwards for like a half an hour.
Right.
And so that, now it's like, nope, we can roll down the window, Nezzy. We can sing. We can do all these things. But she's just like, she wants it. It's like her
It's so
drug.
addictive. It is.
Scary.
When I was in college, this was before video games. I'm a little older than you, but they had a pinball machine, and I learned that I couldn't play pinball because I was good at it. I could win and get extra games, so I could just stay there forever.
Yeah.
And pretty soon I would get the splitting headache, because it's so intense. That's what people are doing all the time on their phones.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that brings me. Are we good, Jordan? Okay. It brings me to a question. Do people that are on the spectrum, they have an addiction of sorts, which I think we all probably do. Is that true? Do you think we trade addictions? So we get off alcohol and drugs, everything's good. A lot of people then become Iron Man, and then they're running all the time. They're swimming, they're whatever it is. Are we swapping things?
Yeah. Well, so absolutely. I'm wired AAA plus type personality. I'm on the go, right? When I first found alcohol, my response to it was, that's better. It just turned off the squirreliness in the squirrel cage in my head, right? I mean, it's a scary place to be. But now I'm in a different place where I'm embracing that and just saying, woohoo, let's see, where do we go next, right?
Create good content.
Exactly. Yeah. But to some extent, I traded alcoholism for workaholism. Now, what we really want, all of us, if we could truly think it through, is we want the kind of life that's authentic. That term gets overused, but really it's I'm having this relationship with you, and when I look you in the eye, I see you. As opposed to in the past, you were just a blur. I was on my way to the next project, right? We feel each other. We connect. We have emotions, and we're living in the moment and truly experiencing it, as opposed to just a spinning top, which I used to be. I mean, I still spin, but I'm trying to have better moments.
Sure.
Better moments. But in the addiction world, absolutely, we trade addictions. We see this all the time. If you go to a 12-step program, you'll hear it all the time, where somebody, if it's pure alcohol, you switch from beer to wine, or from spirits to this or that, and thinking that, well, then you'll be okay. Or you give up alcohol, but you're smoking pot all the time. Or you switch to your Adderall or your meth or something, right? It's all trying to stimulate dopamine. Food, food addicts, right? And you're getting obese. Not that everybody who's obese it's a food addiction necessarily. There's metabolic things that go on. You and I have chatted. I know you have a lot of content on that. But yeah, we will definitely trade addictions, chasing that little bit of, we just want to feel better.
Right.
We just want to feel better. And to feel better in a wholesome way, which is what we're trying to preach on your channels. I know this is really important to you to get the word out. Folks, there's a better way.
Yeah. So what do we do? I mean, I have these cravings, right, where you come home and you want sugar or you want alcohol. For me, it's like I love red wine, or kombucha beer is like my Achilles heel. So I just don't buy it. If it's not around, I don't drink it. But so we have that itch, we have the craving. How can we overcome that? What are some, I'm sure you talk about it in the book, but what are some natural?
Well, first of all, you got to recognize it. So the very first step is just increasing your awareness to say, hey, maybe I've got a problem here, right? So you've got to identify that. And then you've got to understand that there's benefit in changing.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not going to change. You are getting some benefit from your addiction. I mean, when I drank, it was relaxing, and it turned off that spin in my brain. So I'm going to have to replace that with something that's equally or more beneficial. And this is what we want to have people understand. It is so great to be sober, clear-headed, and full of energy and full of life, and bring it on, right? I mean, it's just amazing. So you can have that. So once you understand those things, then you start doing some things to change, right? But some of the things you're talking about are tough, like the sugar. I mean, just this week, so I had shoulder surgery a month ago, horrible. Supraspinatus had to be reattached, and I'm supposed to be wearing a brace right now like this. But
You're
anyway,
using your hands. I'm feeling
I know
bad
I'm
for you
supposed to be
over here.
careful with this arm. But yesterday they brought M&Ms out. Now normally I can resist those.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, "Oh, it's my pain medicine." So I had some M&Ms, and I felt worse afterwards. My sugar, I could feel my sugar dropping the next hour. I was just like getting shaky. It's like, why do we do this? So, you got to have your awareness, and then you set up ways, artificial or not, to protect yourself from taking those substances that you don't want to take. Like, I mean, you make 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Just keep working on it.
Sure.
Right? So I had an addiction to alcohol, but I was also addicted to food. And I was also addicted to some other things, right? So little by little, I start working on these things. And maybe you got to pick one at a time. If you've got a big Achilles heel, mine was the alcohol, then you go all out for that. Right? You go all in. You're going to do whatever it takes. And I talk about various things in the addiction spectrum book about what you can do.
Love that. A couple questions about behavioral change, but just a kind of a tactical question, I guess. So I invite you over for dinner. I don't know that you have a problem with alcohol. Dr. Paul, you want some wine?
Right.
Do you come out and say, no, I'm a former alcoholic, or I am an alcoholic, or do you grab water? How do you navigate that? Because, sometimes people can be like, oh, you don't drink? Like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
And it's kind of that sort of thing in your life. So it creates an awkward, like, oh, well, I drink, but what's wrong with drinking? That, you know what I mean? Right. So how do you navigate that in a social situation?
Yeah. So very early on, I was just, I was a week sober, and we had our holiday party for work, where I used to work, and there was going to be booze all around. I was scared. I will not deny it. I was scared. I took a Diet Coke, and I just kept it in my hand the whole time.
2 hands?
Oh, yeah, man. And I left early.
Wow.
I just didn't want to chance it. Took me, and this is longer, I think, than many people, it took me about 5 years to where I could be around it and not have it faze me at all. That's a long time, folks.
Yeah.
5 years. And, to this day, I'm 15 years sober, and I don't look at beer commercials. It doesn't bother me. I'm not even drawn to it at all. You could pay me $1 million, I'm not taking a drink, because I love my life, and I know where it'll take me if I drink it, because I do get that phenomenon of craving. I tested that theory out many, many times.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not going there.
Right.
But I'm also not going to sit here and fantasize about, oh, wouldn't that be nice? Just in case it triggers something.
Wow.
But to speak to your party, if you're at your house and you want to drink, I'm fine with it. If you ask me, well, do you want to drink? I'll say, oh, no, I'm good, thanks. I just like drinking water. And if you push a little harder,
then
which some people do,
Yeah.
they'll say, well, come on, why don't you drink? I'll say, mine is, I'll just say, you know what? I drank my lifetime quota. I just crammed it into 20 years. I did. I drank a lot.
Yeah.
And man, I just can't have any more. I've had my quota. And people
great.
will accept that.
Yeah. They appreciate that.
People will accept that.
Okay.
And I've heard different people come up with different things. You just come up with something that you're comfortable with, that rings true for you, and then just make sure you're ready, right? Like a reflex, you have a response.
Yes.
I also tell my patients, so in my addiction clinic, most of my patients are heroin addicts, and a lot of them are homeless or barely have a place to live. They certainly don't have a car, so they're on the transit system, where it's really easy to run into dealers, right? You're at the bus stop, the train stop, people just come up to you.
Yeah.
I mean, they just do. And when they relapse and they come back, I'll say, well, how did it happen? Oh, I ran into an old friend, and he said he was doing well, and he says, why don't you come hang out? Let's play some video games. And then he pulled out the heroin, and I just used.
Yeah.
And I say, well, you got 2 legs, run like a hot fire. If you're in that position and you're starting to feel triggered, get the heck out of there before it's too late.
Yeah, because you'll regret it later.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. For some people, does that progress build more progress? So you said you were a week sober and stuff, but now 15 years, you're like, you don't want to have a setback at all, because you want to keep going. It's so much time.
Yeah.
It seems like, in the case of like medicine, the more time, you spend, like the specialists and so forth, the harder that they believe in that sort of practice,
Yeah.
So it seems like the longer that you've been sober, the easier it becomes, just because you have all that momentum to fall back on. So is that part of it, where progress begets more progress?
That's been my experience, but I would throw a little caveat in there. I'm still active. I go to meetings once a week. I'm working with addicts every day,
Yeah.
right? I'm teaching this stuff. I'm writing it about in my book, right? So it's always present in my being. Now, people who get sober or they were drug using and they just quit on their own willpower, and they're not plugged into any kind of self-improvement process, self-awareness process, support group systems, right? I mean, we're animal creatures who live best in community, right? You can actually be at higher risk the further out you get if you haven't done anything, right? And I hear these stories all the time in the rooms where people come back after 10, 20, 30 years of sobriety. They relapse thinking, well, I could probably take a drink.
Yeah.
Maybe I wasn't really an alcoholic, right? And you've got to figure that out for yourself. And I think that's part of why sometimes it's hard for younger folks. Everybody else did it. I'm just being a kid.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, every kid does this. That's funny. My kids who smoked pot, all their friends smoked pot. My kids who didn't, none of their friends smoked pot. Well, what percentage of kids smoke pot? It's somewhere around 20, 30%. If you're in that 20, 30%, you're hanging with those kids. And everybody does it. It's your normal. So you got to be, intentional, I think, about who you hang out with. We tend to become like the people we hang out with. I've heard in success talks where you want to hang out with people who are more successful than you are, and you will just naturally be drawn into that sort of a path.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's such a great tip. Yeah, I have friends who drink a lot and friends that don't. And when planning out my social calendar, I like to pivot and hang out with people that aren't going to be drinking because it really, like you said, you wake up clear and all that. But that's really interesting. So it's not totally black or white in terms of the years sober.
Yeah.
There's a little spectrum there.
Yeah.
Now, what does it take for behavioral change, right? So I have a cousin, and not to get all personal and stuff like that, but I think we all have relatives that we're worried about. We talk to them. Yeah, they're like, I think I got it under control, or we see them spiraling. Do people need to hit a wall where they're like, they realize themselves, or is there a way
to hit bottom?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. So treatment saves lives. We could take the story of my wife, and I think she was going to be dead probably within weeks, where she had gotten with her disease. And so an intervention and treatment before death was a good idea.
Yes.
And it worked, right? I have a son whose story's on the internet, so we can talk about him. He says we can. He went to treatment and relapsed. Now he's good now. He's back and doing amazing. But the same thing. He hadn't hit bottom enough for him, right?
Sure.
So I get stories all the time of parents who want sobriety or treatment for their kid more than the kid wants it themselves. And they'll mortgage their home and cash in their retirement accounts and spend tens of thousands of dollars for a child who is not even interested in getting clean or sober. So it's absolutely wasted if they have absolutely no intention of even learning anything, right? I have a nephew who was sent to Portland. I live in Portland. Thanks, brother. Hey, it's a long story. Anyway, he lands, he's on a plane. He's going to be there tomorrow. And he was in the middle of his addiction and probably some mental health challenges as well. And, we have a big talk with all his cousins, and we love him and we want to support him. And he didn't want to be doing anything different. He wanted to live on the street. That's where he was comfortable. So he started living on the street and getting into that lifestyle. He needs an intervention, but several have been done. He's been to 2 different treatment centers. He's been in 2 different sober homes. He's been in multiple different family members' homes who are trying to help him, and he's not there for some reason. So in his case, I guess it has to get a little worse. I'm scared for him, right?
Sure.
If you're a parent or anybody who has a loved one who's struggling like that and they're really spiraling pretty hard, you want to kind of intervene before it gets too late.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
In my addiction summit that starts in a couple weeks, I interviewed one mom who actually lost her daughter to the disease. And what she learned was that she had to, at some point, realize that her addict daughter was making her own choices, and she had to go on with her own life, because sometimes, as a parent, the kid who's struggling the most sort of dictates how you feel.
Yeah.
And you have to go on with your own life and just set a good example and say, hey, I'm here for you, and you can always come to me. But we're not going to go wallow in that disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is there therapy on the parent side or the spouse's side, in the sense that you need to learn how to manage that relationship?
Absolutely. So in the 12-step world, there's Al-Anon. For both parents, spouses, or anybody that's trying to work with somebody else, and for the addict or alcoholic themselves, there's one program I'm really, really excited about. 2 of my interviews for the Addiction Summit speak to this. Nice. The book is called Knowing How by Julie Valenti, the 20 concepts. And in a nutshell, here's what it is. We have 80% of our brain is subconscious, and it's wired to pick up that bear we were talking about, so that you can fight or flight, be safe.
Yeah.
The brain is wired to protect us. But those instincts start firing all the time when they shouldn't be, before our thinking 20% of our mind, the intelligent mind, can say, no, Paul, you don't need to be afraid today. We're okay. We got this, right? And so we can help anybody who's had childhood trauma, PTSD of any sort, things that lead us to self-medicate and become addicted, by doing this kind of work, right? So it's called wisdomandrecovery.com is their website, and eventually I think there should be one of these places on every corner.
No, that's great.
It's just a phenomenal program. And that's just one example. There's mindfulness, there's meditation, there's 12-step work. There are so many valuable things that can be done. I highlight these in the book. I highlight them in this summit, the Addiction Summit.
That starts middle of August. So this interview will be out, guys. I'll put a link below in the YouTube description for that summit in the book.
Yeah.
So you interviewed me on that. We talked a lot about the ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
Have you found that? I mean, this is just my hypothesis with normalizing the GABA to glutamate, and just anecdotal reports of food cravings going away.
Yeah.
Transferability to addictions, substance addictions, maybe. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah. So I've personally experienced the ketogenic benefit. I learned that actually from some of your work.
Cool.
Watching some of your YouTube videos, and you've got some great stuff out there, folks. Check it out. This guy's got some of the best stuff on the internet for ketogenic, and I know you've personally done this. So I thought, well, if Mike can do it, I could try this. And so I started trying it, and you know what? I never felt better. More energy. I always had this huge gut that I couldn't seem to shed, and it was able to, I chip away at it through doing ketogenic. And then some of the most exciting stuff I learned, I think you and I were together at the Thought Leaders Symposium.
Yeah.
And there was this doctor from California who presented ketogenic and fasting causing stem cells to be released from bone marrow and healing type 1 diabetes. So people who couldn't make insulin anymore from their islet cells of their pancreas starting to make insulin from ketogenic and fasting. I'm thinking, that's crazy.
Right.
That's powerful, folks. I don't care what you're suffering from. It's worth a try, right? I mean, obviously, I'm not giving medical advice on this format, but but it's definitely something to look into.
Yeah. I mean, there's really no downside or risk.
Yeah.
Maybe potential blood sugar crash if you're fatty liver from alcoholism or something like that. But very, very minimal. Interesting. So it's interesting how the spectrum is pivoting again towards different drugs like psilocybin and LSD and ayahuasca as remedies. Here we are talking about substances and getting off them, but maybe short-term use of microdosing. I personally experimented with some of this, so I'm curious what your feedback is, and I'll share some stories. But how do you feel about some of that?
So I have not experimented with that, and here's my thoughts. I do feel like, from what I've observed, GABA Mate has spoken on this, so I've listened to some of his talks, and you obviously have way more experience than I do because you've actually experienced it. So I'll listen to those who've tried it. My fear is, in a society that's stressed out, poorly nourished, toxin loaded, and wanting to self-medicate, and then you give them something that's going to be psychoactive, what's going to happen? It makes me nervous.
Yeah.
Frankly, it makes me nervous because in that scenario, with that as your framework, you're going to want to just get off the planet because you're stressed out and anxious. And so if there's any way this substance can make me not have to deal with reality, bring it on,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have a bunch of people not dealing with reality. I think when I hear GABA Mate talk or you're speaking positively of it, it's more almost in a spiritual sense. You already have your toxins, working on getting toxins out of your body, eating healthy, getting your nutrients, being healthy in every other way. And now you're trying to get a little deeper on the spiritual sense. But you're doing it intentionally for that purpose, with careful use of dose probably, and choice of substance, and hopefully there's some monitoring of what's happening. Then it may have a role, right, in that very carefully defined use. I just get nervous if highly psychoactive substances are going to just be thrown out there too. I'm thinking of my own kids who are still drinking, smoking pot, and looking for ways of escaping reality. And then my patients who are struggling to get off of numerous substances: heroin, meth, ADD meds, cigarettes. Let's give you one more. This will help you.
Little cocktail.
Yeah, I'm sure this will help. I'm thinking, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I definitely see that.
Tell me a little bit about
it was
the
a buddy of
positive
mine.
side.
Buddy of mine in Toronto. I had a lot of anger towards my older stepbrother from introducing me to things when I was 9, abusing me and all that sort of stuff. And I could never really. And then that translated into impatience, irritability, road rage in traffic. I'm always a guy honking, all that sort of stuff. And that all went away with just some microdosing LSD, and then some ayahuasca. I did one ayahuasca journey. But I will caution people that the 10 days after that experience, so it was amazing. 24 hours after, felt really connected to everyone, the universe, my meaning, my purpose. My voice actually got deeper, which was really weird.
Did it stay deeper?
You'll have to tell me. I don't know. But when I go and listen to old videos that I did on the internet, I'm like, wow, I sound like a little kid. I'm like speaking through my throat. And so evidently my heart chakra, which I know nothing about, I'm talking about things I'm not aware of, but my heart chakra, according to the shaman, opened up and all that. However, the 10 days after were really rough. It was like depersonalization, felt really depressed. And I started to think, what did I do? This was stupid. I would have conversations like this, one podcast, and I was just in la la land. I couldn't keep up.
See, that scares me, the depersonalization thing, because if you think about schizophrenia and psychosis, and there are people who weren't schizophrenic or having problems with psychotic breaks who become that way. And nobody's sure what happened. All right. We do know that for some cases, marijuana will trigger that. Now, was it going to happen anyway? That's what some people will argue. I don't know. But if it's like 1 in 6 chances, am I going to spin that Russian roulette,
Right.
And I don't know about these other psychoactive substances. The brain is so delicate. And I guess my message for most people is that, just think about how precious our health is at the cellular level, all these complex neurotransmitters, and we're just scratching the surface of understanding what we've done, first of all, with all the toxins we've added, what we're doing with the nutrient-depleted diet most people are eating, and then we're throwing in psychoactive substances. I think we have to be cautious.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're susceptible to, some of those things. Depersonalization, I'm sure you've studied that and everything. I know Noah talks a lot about that in his videos. What is that? Is there a benefit to that?
Is it beneficial to depersonalize?
Yeah, it seems it seems weird. Yeah,
I don't know. So Noah, my son, who's been through it, I think he would be like, oh no, you do not want to go there.
Yeah.
It's a scary place. If there's people who can go on a journey and have it be part of a spiritual process that somehow is helpful to them, maybe, but I don't know, man.
It's not a positive.
I wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know depression, if you look at the kind of the teleologic reason why depression exists, there's some benefit because it kind of sometimes leads to change. So I was wondering if there was any evolutionary benefit to depersonalization.
Okay. I see where you're going. I didn't quite get that's the direction you were. Yeah. Kids who are abused horribly as young children, how they have to turn off, they have to depersonalize. They have to get out of that experience and be somewhere else.
Right.
And so that's sort of an example, I think, isn't it, of depersonalization?
Potentially.
Yeah. And so it's adaptive,
right?
Because it's horrific what they're going through. They can't I don't know how one would continue to survive, right? If
Totally.
whether it's severe sexual abuse or physical abuse, you just sort of have to disconnect. You know, when you're talking about intentionally choosing to go get depersonalized, does that have therapeutic benefit? I have no clue.
Right.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
scares me a bit just
Totally.
because how do you know you're going to get back to baseline?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So that's what I worry about. I think, you know, I alluded to earlier the 20 concepts, knowing how book work for PTSD. That's a way of actually, there are these 20 concepts are actually skills for rewiring the brain to get you away from old pathways that are maladaptive. So I'd lean more towards that, where you're in control of the decision and the choice you're making. Oh, this is where I need to apply this concept.
Sure.
Rather than instinctively or reflexively going back to a primitive pathway that was set up in a dysfunctional situation.
Totally. That makes sense. And so along those lines, I mean, understanding kind of how these things work and so forth, are they beneficial or not? We were talking offline about how addictions in general can be maladaptive, yes, but if you transfer or kind of transmute that energy into something positive, that addictive personality, I mean, is that why addictions, you think, from a human evolutionary perspective, why they're still in our brain? And maybe some of the most, a lot of successful actors.
Why haven't all the addicts died off?
Yeah.
And it's no longer an issue.
Sure.
Right. Well, we know. I mean, Hemingway was an alcoholic. Mozart, I think, some of the great classical musicians. A lot of creative people. Stephen King have struggled with drugs or alcohol. So there's something to, I think, either the highly creative mind or the intense triple type A personality like myself, where we just have to calm the mind, right? We just have to, and what I've learned, which speaks to your question, is redirect that energy, right? And embrace it and make the most of it. And so as I was raising my kids, like my son, who ended up having a lot of problems with alcohol, his best summers were when he was busy. Like he would be having 2 or 3 jobs and playing a sport or 2. He was in heaven. Super busy. You would think you were maxing this poor kid out. If he was idle, he'd go and find trouble. That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So definitely something in that for many of us. I think we want to be directing our energies in positive ways.
Yeah. I have a really personal story on that. My father-in-law, who recently passed away from alcoholism, just drank himself into oblivion right after he retired.
Yeah.
And it was it was 2 glasses of wine to 3 to a bottle to multiple bottles, then didn't leave the bed, and then it was just like,
wow.
Yeah.
And it didn't take long, did it?
no, that's the thing. I mean, that's the body's so adaptive and resilient.
Yeah.
But when you give it the wrong messages for too long, there's no coming back.
Yeah, that's that sad state of chronic alcoholism when you don't ever let yourself detox. So when he was starting to drink 24/7, it's a steady, quick decline for a lot of people if you're hitting it hard.
Is it the liver that ultimately fails?
Yeah, the liver can't detox at that rate, so you max it out, and now I think you're just pickling yourself.
Yeah, critical functions of the body just start to
Yeah, I
fail.
mean, alcohol is a poison.
Yeah.
So Annie Grace's book, Naked Mind, it's an interesting perspective on alcohol, and it says, what a crazy society in a sense that we go to great lengths to mask this poison and make it palatable. When you think of all the amazing drinks we make, right?
Right.
And the social events, and when you separate the effects of alcohol from the fun activity, you start to realize it was the fun activity that you were after, not the alcohol.
Right.
And when you recognize it for an addictive poison that it is, animals won't go take pure alcohol. Even if you try to doctor it up, they'll take water, right? Only us really highly intelligent humans.
Yeah, who know that they're thinking like
right?
it.
We can outthink ourselves
Yeah.
and just take in this addictive poison and say we're doing a good thing and we're having a good time. So just look at us.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not just with alcohol, right? I mean, the different leaves and so. What's it called? Quat in Africa. It's like
I've read about it. Yeah,
a
I've never
chewable
tasted
thing.
it.
So it seems like we will always find something.
Yeah. Something to alter our state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, All right, so we got the book. We have a few final questions, but anything about the book, the summit? You've interjected a lot of like great highlights and resources for people.
Yeah.
Things that we didn't cover that folks should know?
Well, let me start with the book and just say, we know from the news, we know from looking around, people are hurting. People are hurting on all sorts of levels. Opiates get the highlights, right? And we have 115 deaths per day from opiate overdose. More deaths in 1 year than happened in all of Vietnam.
Oh my gosh.
More deaths than what happened from motor vehicle accidents in a year. And yet it's just sort of we're hearing about it, but we don't have a solution. Yeah. Okay? We've got to empower the individual. You, the person who's listening, or if you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to it, you can take the power back. And this book will help you do that. Mm-hmm. So that's one message I have for you. And then the Addiction Summit was a blessing in disguise. You and I were just chatting. I'm going, I don't know if I would ever do a summit again. It was so much work. You've done one. But what I learned in doing this, interviewing 28 different people, experts in all sorts of areas that I wished I'd interviewed before I wrote the book, I would have written an entirely different book. Wow. But anyway, you've got both. Because in this summit, I'm talking to people who have healed themselves. A person who was so severely abused as a child that it's the most horrendous story you're ever going to hear. Wow. And yet he raised his 3 younger children, and none of them are addicted. Wow. It's insane what they went through. Mm-hmm. We've got mindfulness and meditation tips from more than one expert. We've got spiritual talk. We've got a lot of how to be healthy, holistic, and how that heals your body. And that sort of ties in with what I was trying to present in the book. That, first, all right, I've got like a 13-point plan in my book and I don't think I'll go through all 13, but I'll just touch on a few. Number 1, have a laser-focused why. You need to know why you're going to make a change in your lifestyle or why you want to change the direction you're going in your life. If your life is perfect, great. Don't worry about it. I mean, if you can go in the mirror, look yourself in the eye, and maintain eye contact and say, I love you. I love everything you're doing, and you're doing everything exactly the way it needs to be. You don't need to change a thing. I just love you the way you are. And you make that eye contact, and you don't break eye contact, and you feel good, you're probably fine.
30 seconds?
Yeah, it's about 30 seconds.
All right.
When I was in my addiction at the end, I couldn't look at myself more than a couple seconds. I was like, I didn't like what I was seeing, right? It was that emptiness thing we were talking about. Yeah. You want to commit to honesty. I tell my addicts in my clinic when they first come in, I just had a new guy today, and I said, look, the only thing I care about is honesty. Relapse is expected. It's optional, but it's expected. Just tell me. Don't try to be sneaky and, just, folks, that's what kept us sick. Our secrets keep us sick. Mm-hmm. So if you can just be honest and you're asking for help, right, then you've got a great shot at making a turnaround. And I talk about things like, real food, nutrition, the importance of getting nutrients, supplementing vitamin D. There's other supplements that really help with addiction. A huge X factor that I don't think we've touched on is stress. We've alluded to it, but stress is the big one. Those cell phones, we did touch on that stress. Yep. But, the news is stressful. Turn it off. Yeah. I'm driving to work one day, and this one leader of one country is talking about having a bigger button than the leader of another country, right? And I'm thinking, nuclear war, we're going to blow each other apart. I'm starting to get stressed out. I think, what am I doing? I reach forward, switch to music, and instantly was like, that's better. Yeah. Right? Turn off the news. De-stress your life. It's super, super important. And having a healthy community is a piece of being less stressed. You're a part of my healthy community, and I'm so grateful you're here. Yeah, I'm so grateful I can tap into all the wisdom that you throw out there for the world to see. We've got to tap in and join forces, link arms, and get with our tribe, the people who are wanting to help us get well, right? Real wellness, health at a deep cellular level, and a spiritual level, and a wholeness level, and a community level. From the biome on the inside to the outside connections we have with people. And there's so much more. I could go on, but we've been talking for a while.
Yeah, that's what the book's for. That's what the summit's for.
Yep.
And back to that community level, I mean, do you think that the alcoholism and the drug addictions would be the way they are now if we were all living in tribal communities? Because it would seem that there's only a limited amount of alcohol available. I mean, you can only, and then maybe you have a little bit to socialize, but it's not like you're going to go home by yourself. And You think that's part of it? We're just
Huge part of it.
isolated?
Huge part of it. You take a human being and you isolate them, like I was when I left Africa and went to college, and I'm all on my own. Huge stress, right? So if you stay in a community that's nurturing, a community that has maybe generations of support, so it's not just one age group, but you're connected with wisdom and nurture, and you've got options, right? So if I go to you and you're my best friend and you don't give me the answer I need, I can go to this person. I can go to my parent, my grandparent, my sibling. We need that.
Yeah.
We're losing community. And in fact, the connectedness that we have on our cell phones is actually disconnecting us more than we ever realized. It's not the same. There's something about being in the same room, touching one another, just, hey, man, it's good to be together.
Yeah.
That's different. I'm not saying don't connect socially, because you can get support. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. It's not like we throw away the baby with the bathwater, but real connection is important.
Yeah. So if you have a lot of Facebook friends, it doesn't obviate the need to create real friends in person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's something impersonal about some of that, and it doesn't translate into, like if I'm struggling, my Facebook friends aren't going to know unless I put it in writing.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to know. If I'm struggling, you're sitting right there. You're going to know.
Pick up on it.
Right? That's just so important.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we got a few final questions, and maybe we can gear these towards the context of addiction.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about supplements and herbs and food. If there's just like one thing that someone's struggling, whether it's cell phone addiction, porn addiction, alcoholism, opiates, what's one like nutritional supplement, herb, botanical, whole food that like you found to be particularly effective? You mentioned vitamin D, but I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, vitamin D is my pet favorite supplement because everybody's so deficient and it's so important.
And you live in Portland.
Yeah, we live in the Northwest.
Yeah.
It's important for your immune system. It's important for just obviously calcium and bone and all that. But yeah, otherwise, I'm intrigued a little bit with CBD. I'm not an expert on CBD yet. I'm going to learn more and more. It also has important value in the immune system and in anxiety. So in addiction, we have a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
They just go hand in hand. And so what things can help with anxiety? Magnesium. There's the precursors of the neurotransmitters. So tyrosine, tryptophan, theanine is calming. So these are all things that, I'm not giving you one, right?
No, it's great.
But these are all things that are important, and I think CBD may have a growing role. I really do. It doesn't have the dangers that THC has that, that can trigger depersonalization and other things. So those are a few. I'd probably stick with that for now.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
Some of the adaptogenic herbs. I think holy basil you like and things.
Yeah. So all the adaptogens to help with the adrenal function and stress. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and sleep and all that.
Ashwagandha, and there's other adaptogens that are so important.
Yeah, that's great. We like to talk about morning routines, and stuff that kind of kickstarts the day.
Yep.
If you were talking to an addict who really struggled, felt depressed in the morning, and that triggered them to use or drink or whatever, what are some tips that those of us that are susceptible to addictions, what can we do in the morning to kickstart progress and success?
Yeah. So I think the best way to start your day is not on your cell phone or your email, but to take a moment to drink a tall glass of water and meditate. I'm not a great meditator, but I've started, and I'm now doing it almost every day. I want it to be part of my morning routine. I'm a work in progress in that regard. Next time you interview me, I'll be able to tell you, oh yeah, that's how I start my day. Yeah. I actually bought a tool to help me called Muse. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Have one, it's great.
Yeah, so I put that on my head, and it just almost makes it a game to help me do some meditation when I'm otherwise a little too squirrely to just focus in and do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's super important.
Totally.
Yeah. If you want to do a little stretching, just to sort of get the body moving, kind of like a cat does, there's some value in that. And people who can exercise first thing in the morning, I can't. I get sweaty so quickly, and then it takes me 2 hours to cool down, and I'm supposed to be at work by then. So,
yeah.
So I incorporate after the some little meditation and downtime. I actually analyze the world research just because I don't want to miss anything, and that's a moment I can give to that project. But no, if you're struggling from stress or addictions, you want to do things that de-stress you. Set your day up to be more in touch with your spiritual side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I like that. I mean, you can, with meditation, I mean, you said some things, I don't want to like correct you or anything like that, but we try and like force it and like, I need to be calm, but just being aware of like, there's a little like water cooler. You can hear that in the background.
Yeah.
Just that moment awareness.
It's
I think
okay.
we
You
interviewed.
just acknowledge it and then just go back to just focusing in on your breathing is what I try to focus on.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I learned a lot just this last year about meditation because I thought my brain's too squirrely. I can't meditate.
I suck at this.
Yeah. I'm not going to be able to do this because I thought I had to turn my brain off. No, you just focus on something like breathing. And I pick the breath going in and out of my nose. Some people will pick their abdomen, whatever it is. And then you acknowledge the thoughts that come. Try not to judge it. Let it come and go back to breathing.
Love that. Yeah, great
It's
tip.
important.
It's a good reminder for people because we try to we have this preconceived notion about what meditation is or isn't, and then what you just explained is like it's brilliant. Not that I'm an expert at all.
No, and it's a hugely beneficial thing to do, just to set up your whole day, 5-10 minutes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on days where I Instagram and don't meditate versus meditate and no Instagram first thing in the morning, they're completely different days.
Yep.
That anxiety, those feelings.
The other thing we should try, you may be already doing this, but you spoke of road rage. If I cut it too close on my time to get to work, I'm kind of driving like road rage. I mean, I'm like on it. And if I would just have an extra 5 minutes, I could kick back, leave extra room with the car in front of me. The guys who are in a hurry can just go on by. And I would get there
calm.
Just 5 minutes later, on time, calm. These are just choices we can make, right?
Totally.
So it's worth thinking about it.
It's good, yeah. In our house, the clock's always 5 minutes faster for that reason.
I do
but then
the
you
same
start
thing.
to know that, and then you're like,
it's like, I still got 5 minutes.
Yeah, so you got to constantly, all these little tricks.
Yeah.
Gosh, we got to, all these tactics. That's great. Well, let's see. I mean, I've asked you this question, I think 3 times, if you were to bump into a politician of sorts. But if you were to, let's change it up. If you were to bump into someone that's deep into an addictive state, and then again, gambling, porn, iPhone use, drugs, whatever.
Yeah.
What's the most powerful thing that you could share with them to like really help them see for themselves that maybe they need to make a change?
Whew. What I'm aware of is the only way you can reach somebody is by sharing your story. So, if you're struggling with gambling, I can't tell you about, man, I think I'm worried about your gambling. You're going to go right into defensive. But I could say, man, I've sure been struggling. Every time I go to the casino, I lose so much money, and then I just want to win back more money, and I end up pouring more money. I leave feeling horrible. I've really been having a hard time with that. I'm looking into this or that or whatever right now. That's not been my personal challenge, so that wasn't a good example. But I could sure tell you about my drinking story, right? And I can share that with deep conviction of how it was, what I did, and what it's like now. And I can share that with from my heart, and you'll feel it because it's real. It's me. And if you've had a struggle or not, I'm not here to convince you that you need to do anything.
Right.
I just, because I care about you and I know you care about me, I felt like I wanted to share this story, right? And sometimes we reach people and they see themselves in our own story, and then they might ask a question that can help guide them towards the help they need.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's more powerful because we good, Jordan? Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So I think it's in sharing our own stories, and then we find a common
connection in that.
Yeah.
And then instead of thinking, oh, this will never happen to me, I'm in control, they think, oh, well, if that happened to him,
right,
I like and care about this person, I trust them, then this could probably happen to me.
And this is something that was so powerful about the summit. So I went into this not really knowing what I was doing. I'm interviewing 28 different people, several MDs and NDs and other authors, and I'm like a little intimidated. This isn't my area of being an interviewer, right? And by sharing my own story and being open about the fact that I had challenges with alcohol myself and some of my family stories, people just opened up, right? It's a powerful summit because of that very dynamic that you're talking about.
That vulnerability.
Be vulnerable with people, be sincere, be authentic, and they feel it. Even on the phone or on Skype or Zoom. You know, it was like
Yeah.
we were connected. There was tears, there was goosebumps throughout this interview. I'm like, wow, everyone. I'd come back and tell my wife, because she sometimes was right in the next room. I'd say, I can't believe it. That was such a great interview. She goes, you always say that. I was like, no, it's real. I'm like, I cannot believe how powerful these interviews were.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what's the URL for the summit again?
So the summit is theaddictionsummit.com.
Okay.
If you go to addictionspectrum.com, you go to a link where you can get both the summit and my book.
Nice. We'll put that right below, guys.
Yeah.
Dr. Paul, I'm very grateful always for these conversations. And I'll never forget, in 2011, where I started calling on Portland to be, as a rep for Zymogen.
Yeah.
And I remember you wanted Sammy, I think, for Noah, or you said your son at the time. And then you gave me your vaccine-friendly plan schedule back then, and we used that with my daughter, and now she's super happy, healthy, and all that. So very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Always enjoy our conversation. So guys, definitely check out the book, The Addiction Spectrum. I'll put a link below here in the show notes, and then also the summit. You interviewed me on the summit. We actually had a triad going on with Noah, yourself, and me. That was really cool.
So your interview was wonderful because it kind of set the stage early on for how things were going to go. I was still pretty new at it, and you were so gracious to let my son, who was just fresh in recovery, days of just getting sober, and thank you for allowing that, because it added an interesting little element, right, of somebody who's really fresh. And it was a powerful interview, so people are going to love that.
It's awesome. Yeah, and since then, Noah's lost. He's like shredded six-pack.
That's right.
He's really like taking fitness. He was already fit, but he's taking it to the next level, which is great.
Level. Yeah. And his life is just. And one of the interesting things, he filmed a lot of our interviews, and so he got to watch my interview with you. He got to watch my interview with several other people, and it was that process that had him get sober. It was just like he couldn't deny it anymore. Yeah. Right. That was that thing where, like, how do you reach people? You tell your stories, right? And they're not feeling pressured. They're just observing and absorbing, and then they start, given the right information, we can make good decisions even when we are struggling. So this is it, folks. The Addiction Spectrum and the Addiction Summit. Addictionspectrum.com will get you to both. Thanks.
Love it. And your YouTube channel is amazing too. And speaking of vulnerability, you're very vulnerable in those videos, as are the parents and the children, which is great. And I think that's why it's so popular. You're at 550K or something subscribers.
We're almost at 700 now.
700? Oh, gosh. Yeah, I knew it was way up there. Yeah. You're going to hit 1 million soon.
We're going to hit 1 million in this next year. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. That's amazing. Dr. Paul, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you very much.
My pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Cool. All right.
All right. So